Um, that's me. I discovered a book the other day which my mother gave me in 1951, entitled The Butterfly Book for the Pocket. And she's written in that for my birthday in 1951, which was rather a long time ago. And I've been obsessed with butterflies almost ever since. Which is quite sad really, because I ended up being an entomologist, which was not terribly clever, because in those days the only things that entomologists did was go out and spray things and try and kill as many as possible. And I did that in the Sudan for a couple of years, and I found it very disappointing. I loved the Sudan, but I didn't like spraying stuff because it wasn't terribly clever and it never worked. So I came back and did a PhD on DDT pollution, and that put me off completely, and went off in the early 70s, because I happened to inherit some money, to buy a small holding and raise some organic children, which I have managed to do. So I've been sort of farming and gardening in Montgomeryshire for a very long time. And one of the things I've tried to do is manage some of that small holding for wildlife. And part of what I want to tell you today is about how you manage land for wildlife. And carry on. So we've lost so many different species in different places. There are, the large copper went from the fens in about 1890, and there are current changes in agriculture which are destroying wildlife, and particularly butterflies, all over Europe, and particularly still in the UK. So one of the things that I think people don't realise is that so many of our butterflies in this part of the world are associated with grassland. If you go to places like Ghana, or I go to India, most of the butterflies are associated with woodland edge and forest and different types of trees. Whereas in Europe, most of our butterflies, nearly all of them, are associated with grassland. And the coexistence of farming systems with the butterflies works, or has worked, until the farmers have changed the way they manage it. I won't go on any more about that. That's my small holding. We had 8 acres, it's quite fun. I ate well, it was bloody hard work, and I've now sold it, which is wonderful, so I can now do more travelling. This is one of my fields, which is very much species-rich grassland. I went up there with a little hoover this year and collected 125 grams of hay rattle in an hour, that's hay rattle seed, which is quite fun, because I wanted to give it away to people, and that was very useful. So I managed it for butterflies. So you've got things like meadow brown, you've got things like ringlet there, we had dark green fritillary, and that's the hay rattle. And that's the species list, which you can look at while I'm talking. And the whole idea of it was you can't manage the entire farm for wildlife all at the same time. I was keeping sheep and cattle, and the big field that I've just shown you had cattle from either very late July or early August right to the autumn, and then a few sheep in the winter, and then I'd shut it up in March. And that allowed the butterflies and the plants to complete their life cycle, to set seed, the hay rattle could set seed, the meadow browns could feed and then fly and then lay their eggs. We had skippers, we had dark green fritillaries, and it was pretty abundant wildlife. We had common blues on the birdsfoot trefoil, nothing particularly special. I planted white leather elm trees for white leather hair trees, and about 15 years later I had them, and then 3 years after that the elm trees died, but that's life. So I used to keep 2 or 3 cows and a bull and rear the calves for either sale as breeding stock to other people or take them to the abattoir when they were about 2 and bring them back in boxes and put them in the freezer and eat rather well. So we didn't use any manure or fertiliser. We occasionally cut that field for the rushes and some of the blackthorn that was coming out of the hedges. It was a very wet field, so although people have tried to make hay on it, it's often a complete disaster, particularly in years like this when it's very, very wet and the tractors get bogged down in it. Never been drained, and as far as I know, it's never had any fertiliser. We did use, we did occasionally have to feed hay there because we keep them as long as possible, as long as it wasn't too wet, and then they would come in for the winter and we would use the manure in the vegetable garden. Now, this is uneconomic for most farmers. Most farmers, my neighbours, have usually had to double in every 20 years. And that usually involves going and buying up another neighbouring farm and spending a lot of money and borrowing a lot of money from the bank. And therefore, they are struggling really. And it is very difficult without some sort of compensation for them to manage places for wildlife properly unless they get serious compensation from the government, which is now, okay, for instance in England, species-rich grassland under countryside stewardship gets £640 per hectare per annum, and it's not the same in Wales because the Welsh government is completely ridiculous about it and is NRW got no money and you can't get in this, that and the other, and they've made a complete mess of a sustainable farming scheme. And I was telling someone just now that I think it's great pity that we don't have the English system, which is a hell of a lot better and it's much more advanced, which is a bit naughty because normally I believe in evolution. But if our politicians in Cardiff were any better, I think we would get somewhere, but they're not, and they're hopeless, so that's life. So most intensive dairy and sheep and arable land in Wales is complete desert for butterflies because the sheep graze it too heavily, or if it's dairy, they cut hay in May, they spray it with slurry and fertiliser as often as they possibly can, and it's only on the roadsides and woodland edge and things like that that you'll get butterflies. Very few things survive on intensive arable land, but also in intensive livestock farming. So we live in a green desert. The surviving rare butterfly sites are often calcareous grassland because they were quarries. I'll talk about one of these later. You can get actively managed deciduous woodland with rides and things like that, and that does work, and you often get good butterflies in that, but active management of deciduous woodland is quite rare nowadays, and most people just let it grow up and get to a sustainable height, and it's pretty dark and you don't get many butterflies. It's often accidents of history. One of the main reasons why some places are still good for butterflies is that they are either commons or military land, or they were taken over in some way for some other purpose than farming. I've done a lot of work on commons because they have escaped the agricultural improvement that is so common in everywhere else, where people plough the land, spray it with glyphosate first, kill all the weeds, and then they give it lots of fertiliser and seeds mixture, and you won't find a single butterfly in it at all. You get good bits of habitat, sometimes on the bigger scales. I've been working with recently with another estate, because the tenant farmers on those estates resisted the incentives that were available 20 or 30 years ago to improve their landlord's land, because that wouldn't do much good to them, because if they got kicked off, they spent a lot of money on it. So often the big estates retain quite a lot of good habitat. The military are the best people for looking after wildlife. They're much better than the Wildlife Trust. Unexploded ordnance is fantastic. Shelling bits of Salisbury Plain is fantastic. Driving across it in tax is the best thing ever. And it's probably the same on some of your military land around here, but I'm told it's really good. There are places where small holdings which were managed as hobbies rather than as commercial farms are really, really good, and they occur quite often where there is things like quarrying as an alternative income for the people 20, 30, 40 years ago. So, if you're going to get people to maintain these and look after them and farm them appropriately, which usually involves some form of grazing, then you've got to pay them you've got to put them in some sort of agri-environment scheme like last year or before that, Tierra Gobble, where they get so much a year for not wrecking it, but also they're advised on the correct management or the best management for it. And that can work as long as the government actually backs it. They do it in England, they don't in Wales. So, you probably heard that the Welsh Government have made a complete mess of the sustainable farming scheme, and all the farmers are really up in arms about it. And I think they're completely right, farmers. It is a total disaster. The lack of empathy and understanding of farming amongst the civil servants. I hope there are no civil servants working in Cardiff. RBW. Good, thank you. I might get shot. They lost the plot. They want box ticking. They want to make sure that no one ever steals 2 pence from the government. It's not going to work. You've got to have people who say, look, we change what we want to do. We actually want you to farm in a wildlife-friendly way. We're going to show you how to do it. We're going to pay you to do various things. Just work with us. That needs boots on the ground with people who understand both conservation and farming. Those people are very rare. Now, remember, Common Agricultural Policy, which after Brexit, we were obviously going to disappear. 50% of farms in Wales, the subsidy check was greater than their net profit. So if they stayed in bed and not done any farming, they would have made more money than if they went out and farmed. They were farming at a loss. Because so much of their costs are so high, and the new equipment and all the rest of it, and product sales are not always terribly good. Now, we need to retain the good grasslands that we have, and there are not many of them. And I said most of this, most of the farming systems that people actually use are not particularly good for butterflies. So we need to make sure that people don't do all these things, but do something else which is worth having. What we don't want is land abandonment, because that is just as bad as farming in the wrong way. Because what happens? You get long grass, it's wonderful for some butterflies for a few years. You've got marble whites, they love it. You get bramble and scrub invading. You get species like ash, sycamore and hawthorn becoming established. You get, over many years, the trees get bigger, the bramble gets thicker, you can't walk through it, and it eventually becomes woodland, and it's not any good for the grass and butterflies to have before. And many nature reserves suffer from this problem, or any other places which were quite good for butterflies. They have to be managed. I was involved with Llanymynech Rocks Nature Reserve for many years, and I've been leading walks there since 1988 or something. And it's quite a big area of limestone grass, and I won't go into the details, but it's quite big. It's partly a golf course. It's on the border, so you've got the Shropshire Wildlife bit and the Montgomeryshire Wildlife bit. And it's quite nice, or was. We used to have all sorts of things there. We used to have small parboiled artillery until a couple of years ago. I saw, when I first went there, we were having brown argus. The graylings have gone, the dingy skipper is still there. And it's all to do with the management of it. So we've had loads of projects over the years, we've had loads of money spent on it, and it still doesn't work. And the problems are that you can't just do scrub clearance, you've got to follow up the scrub clearance with some sort of grazing and management. That's what it looked like in the trenches. Absolutely barren. And it was grazed in that till the 70s by a shepherded herd of sheep. We've lost brown argus, pearl-bordered artillery, small pearl-bordered artillery, grayling and dark green artillery, but we have actually gained 2 species. The silver wash artillery has been moving northward in my part of Wales and is now quite common, and the Essex skipper has moved westwards over the years and has now colonised it. So it's not a complete disaster, but it's terribly sad when you've got these things disappearing from a nature reserve which is technically being managed for nature. We've still got dingy skipper. That's a quite common species in early May, but it's getting scarcer. But that is available in that landscape or in other sites nearby. So we've got a meta-population scattered over a number of sites with small numbers of butterflies in different places. The grizzled skipper is the same. There are lots of different patches in basically 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres with grizzled skippers, and it's still found on the reserves, and it's coming back to the golf course. We lost this very recently. So I did this talk in Llanymynech a few weeks ago, and somebody sent me a photograph that they'd seen in 2023. I actually said it disappeared in 22, but you always get new records. It's gone. This has been lost originally in 2003. I introduced it, reintroduced it with a CCW grant in 2009. It feeds on violets, you probably know all about that. It needs nectar sources, which are abundant on Llanymynech Rocks. It needs south-facing slopes and a warm site, and we haven't seen any since 2020. And the reason what we get loads of green hair streaks, they're doing quite well because they feed mainly on dogwood on that site, and the dogwood is all over.